consider my sermon tonight to be part 3 in a trilogy that began a year ago. Last Rosh HaShana in parts 1 and 2 of So What Happens Now, the Future of Our Dwelling Place, I explored the reasons why congregational life has taken a downturn in synagogues all across America, including ours. And I challenged the congregation to consider some out-of-the-box, or should I say out of the shul, options when it came to keeping members engaged and participating. I presented different ideas, including a one-table approach, which actually Carol Pock just ran with until COVID kind of shut things down. And that involved having Shabbat dinners in congregants' homes. Guitar-accompanied Shabbat services on both Fridays and Saturday nights was another idea. Reconfiguring the sanctuary space to evoke a more intimate setting, and bringing in more guest speakers. I talked about reimagining goals and having a vision for the future, whether that meant maintaining the status quo or actively trying to grow the synagogue. And I ended by wishing you all a new year of possibilities and promise. And things started out so well. We welcomed a wonderful group of new members, had some spirited Shirat Shabbat services, including one that welcomed all those wonderful new members, helped out at the food pantry at Shepherd of Life for Thanksgiving, observed MLK Shabbat complete with the installation of the new board, and created a social justice committee to educate our congregation about important issues that, as Jews, we needed to become more involved in. Yep, it was definitely shaping up to be a new year of possibilities and promise. And then COVID hit. And quoting the words from a famous Hamilton song, we now live in a world turned upside down. Little did I know that when I spoke about finding other ways to engage congregants, not just inside, but outside of the synagogue, that a year later you wouldn't even be able to enter the synagogue. But that hasn't stopped us, however, from having services that have actually been better attended than many of our in-person services, providing interesting, in-depth, informative webinars and classes, and offering social events and fundraisers as well. Yes, we've had to put some of the ambitious goals, as I spoke of last year, on hold, but we've learned how to work with what we do have, and that's been a great accomplishment in and of itself. But while we're still in this limbo stage, trying to figure out when we can safely open again and assume business as usual, I challenge you to use this time to think about another important goal: defining who we are as a synagogue, what we stand for, what we believe in, and what we will ultimately choose to fight for. But first, it's important to look back on our history as a synagogue and remind ourselves about how and why Congregation Beth Shalom came to be. According to my go-to historian, Janet Aronson, Beth Shalom was born in October of 1980 by 10 families, all desiring a home in which to pray and educate their children. They met in different locations and kept growing during the next 6 years. In 1986, Howard and Annette Lackman generously donated land on Fanish Drive, and finally the congregation had a building of its own. Rabbi Keith Stern was hired to be the first full-time rabbi, and membership continued to grow. So much so that they needed to build a religious school building across the street to accommodate the ever-expanding student roster. Rabbi Stern is also responsible for Beth Shalom becoming affiliated with the URJ, the Union of Reform Judaism. Now that was a very significant decision, as it meant that Beth Shalom was now officially recognized as a Reform congregation, one of 850 in North America and 1,200 worldwide. Membership in the URJ meant having access to all the tools, resources, programs, and opportunities that the Reform movement had to offer. We've been members for 34 years now. But a question I was asked recently, namely, is the URJ a leftist organization, prompted me to wonder how much our members really knew about the URJ and their mission, goals, and purpose. So let's begin with the Reform movement in general. Theologically, the Reform movement is rooted in halacha, Jewish law, but not bound by it, enabling a broader, more autonomous interpretation as to how mitzvot, holidays, life cycle events, and prayer services can or should be observed or created. The Reform prayer book does not include every traditional element in prayer found in a more traditional siddur, and often includes interpretive, creative readings in addition to or in place of a more precise translation. And more English is also generally incorporated into the service as compared to an Orthodox or conservative one. Now, I have to admit that when I first became the cantor here, I was a bit apprehensive about serving a Reform congregation. After all, I was trained as a conservative cantor and have been attending conservative synagogues for most of my adult life. I was used to having a 3-hour service, mostly in Hebrew, complete with ancient nusach or melodies. And early on, I did receive some pushback about conducting a service that was a little too conservative. Well, in time, I've learned to appreciate the significance of crafting a service that might not include every word of the text in Hebrew, but that also incorporates memorable English readings, elements of both traditional chanting and modern melodies, and is flexible enough to provide a meaningful Jewish prayer experience within an abbreviated framework. In short, I learned to appreciate all the creative options that a Reform service provided. So I've always had to smile when over the years I've been told how many in our congregation amusingly refer to CBS as Reform conservadox. While it may be true that we have individuals that have come from Reform, conservative, and Orthodox backgrounds, our congregation is undoubtedly Reform. Once a woman steps up to the bima or sits side by side with someone of a different gender, we disassociate from Orthodoxy. Once Barry Goldfarb prepares his incredible non-vegetarian gumbo in our kitchen, or we monitor security through an iPad during services, or, as happened many years ago, a family lights tea candles on Shabbat morning to serve as decorations for Kiddush luncheon tables, we can no longer identify in any way with being conservative. And of course, we confirmed our commitment to the Reform movement when we became members of the URJ 3 decades ago. But being a Reform congregation doesn't just cover issues of faith and observance. The URJ website states, quote, Reform Judaism's commitment to social justice for all, women, people with disabilities, and indeed people from all faiths and backgrounds who lack civil and human rights, is a key pillar of the movement, contributing to its popularity among North American Jews, unquote. And I think it is this commitment to tikkun olam, repair of what has become an increasingly fractured world, that has really helped me feel most at home in the Reform movement. And this is one area in which I believe the other movements lag far behind. All of the 22 organizations of the Reform Jewish movement, from congregations, camps, NIFTY, HUCJIR, the rabbinical school, Israel programs, leadership development conferences, fundraising, and educational programs, and the RAC, the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, which is the Reform movement's social action arm, are all under the leadership of the URJ. And incidentally, CBS has been intimately involved with the RAC since we formed our Social Justice Committee back in January. In short, the URJ, the Union of Reform Judaism, is, quote, the umbrella organization for North American Reform Judaism, which leads the largest Jewish movement in North America, unquote. As offered in the URJ's 1999 Statement of Reform Principles, quote, we are obligated to pursue tzedek, justice and righteousness, and to narrow the gap between the affluent and the poor, to act against discrimination and oppression, to pursue peace, to welcome the stranger, to protect the Earth's biodiversity and natural resources, and to redeem those in physical, economic, and spiritual bondage. In so doing, we reaffirm social action and social justice as a central prophetic focus of traditional Reform Jewish belief and practice, unquote. Or does every Reform synagogue need to abide by the resolutions and policies adopted by the URJ? No. But they should subscribe to its core principles. Rabbi Marla Feldman explains, just as most members know that a hallmark of Reform Judaism is an openness to the other, they should also know that there will be a strong social action component. Mitzvah days, collection drives, social justice sermons. I've never given one of those. Mitzvah days, education about current issues of concern. We will be engaged on issues of local, national, and global concern. We will participate in interfaith coalitions and activities. We will speak out on behalf of the vulnerable, and we will seek justice for all. This is who we are, unquote. So, back to the original question. Is the URJ a leftist organization? Well, I guess it depends on what one means by leftist. Beginning in the 18th century, this term was associated with political movements such as socialism and communism. But today, left can also mean progressive or liberal when it comes to backing a social justice agenda, supporting the ongoing fight for civil rights, racial justice, equity, and gender equality. The URJ fights for all of those issues, but leaves politics at the door. For example, the RAC's voter engagement campaign, Every Voice, Every Vote, which we are a part of, has three main objectives. Making sure we have 100% voting in our Reform congregations and communities. That's our number one at CBS. Helping voters of color outside our congregations overcome voter suppression and encourage them to vote. And advocating with county election officials for safe access to voting. But the messaging is also very clear. This is a bipartisan effort. The goal is to get people out there to vote, not to tell them who to vote for. Yes, the Reform movement under the umbrella of the URJ embraces a progressive mandate. But where does this motivation to devote so much of its platform to this mandate come from? It comes from the most ancient, fundamental, and sacred document we possess, the Torah. Deuteronomy 16, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. Leviticus 19:16, do not stand idly by while your neighbor's blood is shed. Talmud, when the community is in trouble, a person should not say, I will go into my house and eat and drink and be at peace with myself. Micah, do justly, love mercy, walk humbling with your God. Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. Being a Reform congregation is not just about having autonomy when it comes to making decisions about how we choose to pray or eat or observe or celebrate. It also means speaking out against hatred, bigotry, inequality, and oppression in all of its insidious forms. It also means having honest, open, and respectful conversations in education about climate change, food insecurity, voter suppression, race, immigration, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, Israel, and even wearing masks in public. These are all issues grounded in Jewish values and pikuach nefesh, preserving life. And in the days to come, we will look at some of these issues from a Jewish lens, specifically from a Reform Jewish lens, as well as from the teachings of our sacred texts. In this very fragile and volatile time, when lives are at stake, tensions are running high, and these issues are all intertwined, we must not shy away from confronting them head on. We won't always agree about the way we do that, but we can all agree that we want to live in a world that is peaceful, safe, inclusive, that fulfills the physical, emotional, practical, and spiritual needs of every human being, and acknowledges that there is a spark of divinity in each and every soul. And we are part of a community that is committed to making this sacred work one of their highest priorities. How are we going to meet this challenge? Where will we focus our communal energies this year? Are we willing to publicly recognize that for so many in this country, suffering is the status quo? And are we ready to take our place within the Reform community to help ease that suffering? I see Beth Shalom as a spiritual center where we can engage in meaningful worship and study, maintain deep social connection, foster an atmosphere of inclusivity, and engage in transformative social justice work. It's a vision to which I am fully committed. But this cannot be my vision alone. For us to make a difference on any level, it must be yours too. I hope and pray that we can make this commitment together. Nishana Tova and Shabbat Shalom.